Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's midday Western U.S. regional forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. We're just looking back over the last 3 days of total accumulated precipitation. This is kind of our main setup for this video. I'm going to be talking about additional precipitation that is coming into parts of the Pacific Northwest and expanding through the high plains here. I want to talk about additional precipitation that could possibly be coming into the Southwest that is not monsoonally related, but is actually coming out of the tropics. And then the big thing we need to be discussing here is what are our temperatures doing in the next 10 plus days here, because we have a pretty volatile temperature pattern moving forward. And a lot of this is because of the wave train in the upper levels of the atmosphere producing, well, 1, 2, 3 low pressure systems that are kind of lined up here, going all the way back over toward Japan, coming through the Bering Sea there, part of the Bering Sea here, and into the Gulf of Alaska. So we need to see when these storm systems are coming in. We need to pay attention to their trajectory and what they're going to be doing here to the to the western part of the United States. Again, on the day today, we are going to be watching an area here in the Intermountain West for elevated fire risk. This is kind of a follow-up from yesterday, but overall, you're going to see a pretty wet pattern developing here for the western United States. And this, again, is about a month early from when we normally start to see our very active wet season getting going. So let's just take a look at it. This is only over the next 5 days. So we can almost see the trajectory of the storm systems coming in through here. And in the day today, as the first one is approaching, very, very windy conditions. You probably saw it here a moment ago. We do have gale warnings out for this area where we're expecting the winds to be very strong. So as this first storm system approaches, very windy just offshore here. Now, a lot of this precipitation is on the windward side of our mountains, but you're going to see here in a bit that we are going to possibly be able to get some of that rain into the valleys at times. So I'm specifically talking about the Columbia Basin and the Snake River Valley in through here. But certainly the mountains are aiding in the lift of this rainfall. And just through the next 5 days, we can see that some of the rainfall amounts may be totaling 1 inch to maybe in some locations over 3 inches. And then through this corridor right in through here, again, aided by the lift in the mountains, another 1.5 inches to maybe 2 inches of rainfall. What you're not seeing in this is what I'm anticipating happening down here, mainly in Arizona, but coming up with the Baja, there is a system we need to be paying attention to, and this can happen this time of year. So let's get in and talk about some of the details. What I'm playing for you here is our high-resolution NAM model showing you that first system coming on shore there in the Pacific Northwest. If we watch it again, we do see, watch that again. There we go. We do see quite a bit of scattered rainfall moving through Northern California, Oregon, and Washington. And then as that low pressure center moves over into parts of Idaho, after the first system exits, we get another big round of rain in that area. These systems are relatively slow moving. I mean, this is Tuesday early in the morning all the way. This is taking out to Thursday. So this is the next 2 days, widely scattered rainfall event here across the across parts of the Northwest. And that's because the flow of the atmosphere is built into a huge ridge in the center part of the United States. So the storm track is heading in a direction more like this. And that's why you can really see the heavier rain showers following one another and training their way up toward and over that ridge. Now, to add to this discussion, right now, the upper levels of the atmosphere are very conducive over the next week to the development of tropical systems in this area. What I mean by that is that you look deep into the atmosphere, we see that there's excellent support for what we call upper level divergence. And that simply means that the upper levels of the atmosphere are making it possible to exhaust a lot of air as it rises. And rising air makes, all of our adverse weather. So what I'm particularly interested in watching is the trajectory of these 3 separate areas that the National Hurricane Center is paying attention to and the steering currents that might potentially bring them up and in through this area. Now, there's wide open spread here in the potential paths of these systems, but I'm mostly concerned if we can get one to come up over the Baja. And the reason why is right here, okay? Switching over to our longer range model outlook, let's just get us right here through Thursday morning where we discussed. So system number 1 comes through over the next couple of days, some locally very heavy rain out of that as it begins to really form once it gets over the mountains in the high plains, okay? Now, meanwhile, the tropics are brewing and our next system sliding through the Gulf of Alaska. So it looks like we may get through the end of the week relatively uneventful after a very wet next few days in the Northwest. But here comes system number 2, and you can see its main frontal band stretching down right through British Columbia and then eventually hitting here to the west coast of Oregon and Washington. So when is this? This is Saturday afternoon, evening, getting into Sunday morning. That's system number 2 coming through the northwest. Now, notice what the operational, understand that this is the operational GFS model is doing here. It's producing a deep tropical cyclone that is coming up very close to the Baja of California. Now, as it does this, it'll be all about the timing of the upper level winds that could potentially bring this, in here right back into the Baja and eventually over into Arizona. So if it brings it in that direction, this is what the operational GFS is suggesting. See it doing that? That could bring some very, very heavy rainfall to a region that has had, like we've been discussing, an underperforming monsoon season. And as that goes through, our next system is working its way down middle of next week to come in here and hit the British Columbia first, then eventually come in to the Pacific Northwest. So I wanted to know if there's ensemble support for this, and it suggests that there is. You can see the wetter than average pattern in through here, which we just discussed. But do you see the wetter than average conditions in through this area? It's because not only the operational GFS, but the ensemble members are also taking it up into this direction. Now, the operational European is not showing it just yet, but it is not outside of the realm of possibility, which means all week long this week, we need to pay careful attention to see if this is a potential signal, because we know from our latest drought monitor that came out last week, this is an area that we've continued to see development of drought. It's gotten worse over the last month. And so some very late season rainfall here could be very beneficial to the overall water picture of the Southwest, but it could be too much at one time. And also, I expect that once we get the latest drought monitor update this Thursday, we could see some big changes here in the Pacific Northwest with these early arriving rainfall totals here. So we'll keep an eye on all of this throughout this week. Just to keep you up to date on what's going on with our fire risk, we certainly do have our elevated and critical risk areas still where the winds are quite high and the relative humidities are quite low today. So parts of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, this is the region we're watching. Thankfully, yesterday we didn't see too much in the way of fire breakout where our critical risk was, where the humidity was low and the winds were high in that area. So that's at least some good news about what's going on here. But we start our temperature discussion. This was early this morning. Look at the cool air tucked into the mountains right in through here, where we were seeing at higher elevations freezing temperatures. Very interesting. And what we're going to notice is that over the next several days, that cooler pattern hangs on. Take a look at it here. This is high temperature anomaly, so differences from normal on Tuesday. Across much of the West, we're anywhere between 7 and 20 degrees cooler than average. And as we play this one forward, you'll notice that's Tuesday. Look what happens when we get into Wednesday. Much of the same. Much cooler than average weather for this time of year as all the heat builds under a huge ridge in the midsection of the United States. Here's Thursday's high temperatures compared to normal. Same story. Fridays. And as we get into the weekend, we start to see some moderation. And that's because the first big trough finally moves on out, letting for some return to some warmer, well, near normal, but possibly warmer than normal temperatures to the Central Valley of California. But the Northwest, we're on this cool bias throughout this entire week, so we should just get used to it here. And if we just look longer term, how long does that stick around? Well, the good news is I don't see the atmosphere really kind of all stopped up and blocked up at this time. Let me show what I mean here. Here's the deep trough coming in this week. See that? I mean, my goodness, that is what's knocking our temperatures back as a ridge builds into the Gulf of Alaska. Now that ejects finally this weekend, so see it moving out of the way this weekend. We could get a slight warm up in parts of California, but our next trough sneaks in next Sunday, Monday, right in through there, knocking those temperatures back down again. Now beyond this, take a look at what ends up happening. Do you notice here by midweek next week we end up getting this high over low situation here? That could be an interesting setup, keeping the Pacific Northwest warm, but also keeping parts down here of the Four Corners states getting over to Southern California cloudy and potentially slightly cooler than average. So that's an interesting look here, but it's not blocked up. That, you know, normally when I say high or below, I'm like, the pattern's not going to move, but watch, it just breaks down and keeps going. By the time we get out toward the end of the month, a couple of interesting things to point out. we do see overall lower than average heights sitting here in northern Canada getting toward the North Pole. And that tends to make the flow pattern a bit more zonal. When that happens, we tend to see warmer than average conditions across the southern interior of the United States with cooler weather tucked away to the north. If we just take a look at those temperature patterns out that far, yep, deep trough in place now, big ridge building in, and over our next 5 days, that is the pattern. You've seen that quite clearly. Days 6 through 10, we're still dealing with that potential of that high over low setup, hence the maybe the cooler weather due to some cloud cover down here, but overall the Pacific Northwest may warm back up more closer to average. But getting you out to that 11 to 15 day time period, we certainly see the United States kind of split north-south on its temperature anomalies moving forward here. So that's what that flow pattern gets us into here as we progress toward the end of the month, the beginning of October. Now, speaking of October, I really want you to tune in tomorrow to my new long-range weather forecast, because I will be discussing what's going on in the Pacific Ocean and how it will be influencing not only our October temperatures, but we'll go ahead and stretch this out again, looking all the way through the beginning of winter. And the main thing that I need to be discussing here is what we've got going on with the positive phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation with the cooler water right in through this area that has emerged, and what that's doing to the pressure patterns in the Pacific, and ultimately what it's doing to govern the position and strength of the jet stream, which we know along the West Coast completely dominates our flow pattern through winter and who gets precipitation when. We'll discuss it all day tomorrow in our long-range forecast update, so tune back in to check that one out. But for right now, have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.